Okay, it's about 12:34, and looks like we've got quite a few people that are here in the webinar, so I am going to go ahead and get started. Good afternoon, everybody. This is Lloyd Morris with AVS Medical. Thank you for taking time out of your busy day to join us today for this webinar on preparing your McKesson EMR for ICD-10. In the past, we've had webinars that have focused on the practice management side of things and what you need to do on the billing side. Today, we're going to focus on the EMR side of things, so let's go ahead and get started. Before we begin this afternoon, I do want to point out that you can minimize the GoToWebinar control panel that you may see on the right side of your screen by clicking this little tiny button here on the top left. That'll move it out of your way. Today's session is being recorded and will be available on our blog within the next day or two. So our standard disclaimer here, although we do make every effort to make sure that the information provided is accurate and correct, as you know, rules and regulations are constantly changing, so ultimately it's up to each provider and each practice to make sure that they are understanding the ICD-10 and the changes that are required. So as I think everyone knows at this point, ICD-10 is still on track to take effect this October the 1st. However, there are still some groups out there and some efforts that don't seem to be gaining a lot of traction to postpone it yet again. But at this point, it's generally believed and accepted that ICD-10 is going to go forward and go into effect on 10/1. The AMA had been petitioning CMS to meet them sort of halfway and not deny incorrectly coded claims. So CMS has recently announced that they will not deny Medicare claims solely based on accuracy or specificity of the ICD-10 code that is submitted in the first year, meaning you won't be penalized if you submit the wrong code. However, you still have to submit an ICD-10 code. You cannot submit an ICD-9 code and expect to be paid. So, as you know, the diagnosis codes are found all throughout your EMR. Our goal for today is to review those areas and talk about how the change over to ICD-10 affects your EMR. We'll talk about the changes that you'll need to make to certain areas of your templates as well as the rest of the EMR. Now, you may have noticed that the title of this webinar was Getting Your McKesson EMR Ready. That's a fairly broad term, and it covers the 3 client server-based EMRs that McKesson makes. So that's Medisoft Clinical, Lytec MD, and Total Practice Partner. The EMR side is exactly the same for all 3, and for almost all of my comments will apply equally to all 3 of those EMRs. But in those 1 or 2 cases where it doesn't, something slightly different, I will call that out. And the ICD-10 ready version of the McKesson EMRs will be Medisoft Clinical 19 and above, Lytec MD 2014 and above, and Total Practice Partner version 11. Excuse me. So first, let me mention the term SNOMED. You're going to see that word interspersed throughout the EMR as well as the new codes. It is not a snowman, but rather an acronym that stands for Systemized Nomenclature of Medicine. It's not very widely used. However, in order for an electronic medical record to be certified by the Office of the National Coordinator, or the ONC, it's required that an EMR contain SNOMED codes. You don't need to be concerned about SNOMED codes, except in some areas of your meaningful use setup, but for ICD-10 it has no relevance. But you will see it when we insert ICD-10 codes into your notes and your chart, and I just wanted to mention it here. Okay, so the first question is your EMR ready? Has it been set up for ICD-10? And that is controlled. Excuse me, ladies and gentlemen. Hey, the AVS team, I'm going to ask you all to mute your phones, please. So the switch over to ICD-10 in your EMR is controlled in the PR Utils section of your EMR, and by default that date is set to the 1st of October 2015. On the practice management side, you can tell if your software is ready for ICD-10 by checking the set insurance code set in both Medisoft and Lytec. In Practice Partner, you can go to the carrier maintenance screen and you should see 10/1/2015 date on that carrier maintenance screen. And for Practice Partner, that's the bottom image here of this slide, the very bottom image, and it says use ICD-10 code starting on 10/1. So the middle image is Lytec. You can see the ICD-10 effective date is 10/1, and then this top image is Medisoft, and we can't see it because it's hidden, but here's the ICD-10 effective date, says 10/1 as well. So you're going to want to check that in your software just to confirm it. And Medisoft and Lytec, if yours is not set to this now, you want to go ahead and do it now. It doesn't hurt you, it only helps you to go ahead and switch it over now. Okay, so ICD-10 codes are interspersed throughout the system, and to a certain extent it depends on how you've got your EMR and your note templates set up and how you're using other areas of the chart such as orders, electronic encounter forms, prenatal, etc., where and what changes you'll need to make. And we're going to talk about some of those. So let's start with a new feature that was added in this version. You may have already seen this. It's called tooltips. This is a pretty useful feature, and you'll see why in just a few minutes. But in areas like the problem list or anywhere where we see a diagnosis code listed, chart summary, etc., prenatal module, you can hover your mouse over the diagnosis code column, either the 10 or the 9 column, and it will pop up that tooltip that you see there in red. So here the mouse pointer is hovering over the ICD-10 code, and it pops up the description of that code along with the code, the ICD-9 code in description, and then the aforementioned SNOMED code. So you'll see this concept of tooltips repeated quite a bit throughout the program. So moving along, let's talk now about what is probably one of the biggest changes in the software that had to do with ICD-10 and diagnosis codes in general. And that is the change from the old DX diagnosis code lookup function to a new tool which is powered by a company called Health Language Incorporated, or HLI. And you'll hear me refer to this tool pretty frequently just as the HLI tool. So clicking that PBDX button now launches the HLI tool, and I'm sure by this point you've probably already seen it. That's what it looks like now when you click that PBDX button. Once you click that button, you are presented with this new HLI lookup window. The first big change that you'll notice is you put in a natural language term here, provider-friendly term. In this case, you can see that I've entered hypertension onto that top line. So we don't put a code in. We can put a code. We can put a 9 code or a 10 code. We could even put a SNOMED code up there. But generally, you're going to search by just the description. And you can put in something like GERD instead of gastroesophageal reflux. You can just put in natural language terms. But when we do, and we click search, down below it's going to list all of the different criteria that it returns. And we can see right below, highlighted in purple, we see hypertension is the first one on the list there. And we see both the ICD-10, the ICD-9, and the SNOMED code. So if that's the one we want, we would highlight it, and then down below that, we would see the ICD-10 code or codes right in here, the ICD-9 code, and the SNOMED code. This is an example. Now, notice, by the way, there is only one ICD-10 hypertension code that matches hypertension. See that right here. So this is what's known as a one-to-one relationship. There's just one ICD-10 code for that one ICD-9 code. Notice though in this example we've entered the word fracture, and if we select, say, fracture of the femur there, if we look down a little bit further here under the ICD-10 codes, we see multiple, and there's actually a scroll bar here indicating that there are quite a few ICD-10 codes that match that ICD-9 code of 821.00. So we need to do a little bit more work, do a little bit more selection to figure out which ICD-10 code. And that's really where the power of this tool comes in. So if we notice here on the left, we've got an ICD-10 attributes window. So in the case of a fracture, we would select the visit, the fracture type, the laterality, and then the healing type. And let's take a look at the next slide. So here we've chosen the visit type, we've chosen the fracture type, and we've chosen the laterality. And notice as we put those three criteria in, it's now presented us with one ICD-10 code. So the software has kind of done the heavy lifting here, and it's figured out exactly what ICD-10 code we need for that combination of criteria. And so once we have those and we select that ICD-10 code, we can click OK. And when we do, it's going to insert what's known as a triad code into your note or your problem list or past medical history, depending on where you want to insert it. And the triad code shows the description of the problem, again in sort of provider-friendly terms there, fracture of the femur. It's then going to show the ICD-9 code and the ICD-10 code, and then once again it's going to show the SNOMED code. So these are what your codes are going to look like now. Okay, they're always going to look like that. Okay, so the new diagnosis function, as I mentioned, is powered by HLI. And the point I want to make here is it is a web-based service. So if you've used that in the past, you'll notice sometimes if you've got a slow internet connection, you get a little almost like a little timer at the top that runs for 5 or 10 seconds while it's finding the right diagnosis code. So it means you needed that active internet connection in order for this to work. But if you're offline or you don't have an internet connection, it will still work. But it will display diagnosis codes that are stored on your server in something called the Diagnosis Code Maintenance Table. And we're going to talk about that code maintenance table here just a little bit more in a few minutes. But that's the local store of ICD-9 and 10 codes. Now each time you select a code from the HLI web service, that code is automatically entered into your local code maintenance table. So most of them should be there. Okay, so the next thing I want to talk about is updating the ICD-9 codes that may already be in your system. Note that they were not automatically updated when the ICD-10 version of your EMR was installed. They can be updated in several different ways, and I'm going to talk about that here. So first, we're here in a patient's problem list. And here we see an example of a patient who has an active problem of attention deficit disorder. And if you notice in the ICD-10 column, that's this one here, it's a little hard to see because that's in black, that there is no ICD-9 code, ICD-10 code listed for this problem. So if you want to update that, what you would do is you'd come down to the bottom of the screen and you'd click that edit button right here. And when you click edit, it's going to launch the major problem edit window. Okay, so that's what this would look like. And here we would see the ICD-9 code, and we would click the lookup button here on the right hand side. Clicking the lookup button is again going to launch that HLI tool. In this case though, notice that it automatically takes the ICD-9 code and it puts it in the search window for you. And then it is going to show you the corresponding ICD-10 codes down here below. Now at this point, it's up to you to decide which is the appropriate ICD-10 code that matches the ICD-9 code. Notice over here on the left, there are no ICD-10 attributes, just attention deficit disorder just now has one that's the old unspecified, and I can't quite read that even on my screen, but you would have to decide which of those ICD-10 codes you want to have mapped to that ICD-9 code. So once you make that selection, you would click OK, and when you do, it's going to update your major problem. So it's going to drop in the new 10 code on the major problem, and then it's also going to update your major problem list. So here we see that ICD-10 code here. So one very important thing to keep in mind here is that what I just showed you, that exercise updates that ICD-9 code on that patient's problem list and on no others. So it just fixes or just updates the ICD-9 code for that patient and for that problem for that patient. It doesn't do it for all patients, and it doesn't do it for all instances of that ICD-9 code. There is another way to do that, maybe a better way to do that, but I wanted to show you how you can go in and update your problem list. So let's talk about how you would do that, how you would update all of that, excuse me, all of your ICD-9 codes for a given code at any one time. And that's where that diagnosis code maintenance table comes into play. So I've talked about that a couple of times. Let's delve into a little bit about that. The benefit of using the diagnosis code maintenance option to update your codes is that it applies the changes across all the ICD-9 codes and across all patient charts at the same time. So this is probably a better way to go. The way that you access the diagnosis code maintenance table is to launch the dashboard and then go to the maintenance menu and then the tables and then diagnosis and problems. And once you do that, you'll get this this screen here, this image here that's in the background. That's the actual diagnosis code maintenance table. Notice that you can search for a particular ICD-9 diagnosis code here. And when you do, and you find the one you want to update, you would click Edit or double click it, and it's going to launch the diagnosis code maintenance window here that you see on the right. So it launches it, and in this case I've got typhoid fever selected. Double clicked it, it launches the diagnosis code maintenance window, and then I would click on this advanced code search right here. So clicking that is then going to bring up, again, here's 3 images on one slide, but this is the HLI lookup window. Okay, you would type in that ICD-9 code and click search. And when you do, in this case it only found one ICD-10 code, so clicking OK is then going to update that ICD-9 code with the appropriate ICD-10 code. And you can't see it in this little image right here, but there is an OK button. And when you click, excuse me, it actually says close. When you click that close button, as soon as you do, you're going to get this pop up. And it says this change is going to result in an immediate update of the codes for all patients with this problem, in addition to any other areas in the EMR where this code is used. Do you still want to do it? And if you click yes, it's now going to update all instances of that ICD-9 code and all of your patients' problem lists that have that code in it. So one caveat here, I'm going to go back one slide to where we just were. This is where we just were a moment ago. We have seen a fair amount of time where practices have modified the default codes, the default ICD-9 codes that came with their software. Some cases they may have added another digit. Some cases they may have taken a digit out and deleted the decimal places and somewhat modified the default codes that come with the software. If you've modified the default ICD-9 codes that came with your software, instead of, you'll use the same tool, but you'll go to this tab right here where it says Diagnosis Code Mapping. You'll click that, and then you'll do the advanced code search. And when you do that, you'll be given the option. Let's go to the next slide here. Yeah, here it is. Same window, but you would hit the diagnosis code mapping, and then you would do the same process. You'd hit advanced code search, find your 10 code, and click OK. That will map your custom code to the ICD-10 code. Okay, you'll know if you need to do that if you do it the other way, the way I just first showed you, and you get an error. If you get an error, you need to use the diagnosis code mapping instead of just the lookup function there. One of our best practices relating to updating the codes is to run the diagnosis code ranking reports out of your practice management software to determine your top 50 or 100 diagnosis codes. And those numbers are up to you. You know, some practices use a very limited set of diagnosis codes, some use a very broad set, but you're going to want to run that diagnosis code ranking report, and that report will tell you what are the most popular ICD-9 codes you're using, how frequently you're using them. So you can take those lists and then go into that diagnosis code maintenance window and update them ahead of time, saving yourself a lot of time. So there's the names of those reports for the different practice management softwares. Okay, let's talk now a little bit about the templates, the ICD-9 codes in the templates. Some practices use the concept of quick text. So the quick text, I think most of you know, is that blue and red stuff that you see in your templates. If you're using quick text to push diagnosis codes to the problem list, then you're going to need to do one of two things. You're either going to need to edit the quick text so that when you click it, it pulls in the ICD-10 code, or you're going to want to just stop using the quick text concept altogether and just use that HLI lookup tool. For many people, that might be the preferred method. So we've already covered how to use the HLI tool. I want to show you how you would edit the quick text. So in the example here on the left, I'm talking about these two slides here. In the top, we see a portion of a template, and we see bronchitis acute in blue. I think everybody's familiar with the concept here. If you click on that bronchitis acute, it's going to expand and it's going to drop that ICD-9 diagnosis code into our note template. The one on the right, this is actually a past medical history template example, but it's going to be the same whether it's a past medical history template or note template. If I click one of those red chronic illnesses, then yours may say top 50 diagnosis or top 100 diagnosis, just depends on how those were set up. But if you click one of those red things, it's going to give you a list of problems or diagnosis codes that you can select one or more, and then those will go to the problem list. But in either case, we have to take the same action, which is we have to go in and edit the quick text behind that so that it no longer pulls in the 9 code and it pulls in the ICD-10 code. So how do we do that? So let's go over to the quick text editor. So if you're not familiar with how to get there, the way you get to your quick text editor is from the dashboard. You'd click on the task menu and then you'd click on quick text, and doing so would open up the quick text maintenance window. That's the smaller or a little bit larger image here in the background. You'd type in bronchitis and click search. It's going to find the piece of quick text. You would double click it, and then it would open up the ability to edit that piece of quick text. So that's what this middle image is. We see the actual quick text and the ICD-9 code. The way that we do it here is we then come in and we highlight that so it's in black like that, and then you can just delete it. So you'd want to get that out of the quick text, and then once that's out, you would click the lookup button. That's going to launch the HLI tool, and in the HLI tool, you can just type in the ICD-9 code or the description. I think it's easier to type in the code in this example and click search. Once you do, it's going to find the corresponding 10 code. You'll click OK, and then it's going to drop it back into your quick text. So in this example, that piece of quick text has now been updated to the triad code. Excuse me. So that's how you edit the quick text. As I think you can gather, that can be quite lengthy to do that, and that's why we recommend maybe consider just not using quick text in your note templates and just use that HLI tool, particularly in the case of a one-to-many relationship where you've got one ICD-9 code in there now, but you may need to have a list of 4, 5, or 10 ICD-10 codes for that same diagnosis going forward. For the one-to-one, the hypertensions of the world, it might be worth it to go through and edit that quick text in your templates. Okay, let's move on and talk about ICD-10 in other areas of the software. So a new change in this version is the diagnosis codes are now in the orders module. When you open up the lab order entry module, even if you don't have a lab order entry lab interface, you probably still want to use this for the purposes of meaningful use. Excuse me, meaningful use this year. So if you haven't been using this in the past, you're probably going to use it this year because this is now part of meaningful use. But when you go to write an order now, it will pull in the patient's problem list automatically along with the diagnosis codes that are in the problem list and allow you to add one of those diagnosis codes to the order. So you see the diagnosis codes there and the problems circled in red. Those are actually ICD-9 codes, and we don't see the 10 codes. And the reason that is that even if you have updated the ICD-10 codes for those 9 codes, and they've been updated in the system, they've been updated in the chart, it's still going to display the 9 code here until the 1st of October. And after the 1st of October, it will then display the ICD-10 code. So the thinking or the theory here is you choose the diagnosis code you want to associate with this lab order, and then just slightly above and to the right, a little bit hard to see here, you'd click that add button right there, and that would add the diagnosis to this lab order. So after the 1st of October, that would be the ICD-10 code. Okay, not too many more slides here. Apologize. I don't want to take up too much time with this one to get to your questions. Past medical history. This is an area that, for those of you, and I think at this point everybody has upgraded to the ICD-10 version. When you made that upgrade, you might have already struggled with this one, but in the past medical history templates, if you today have the .mp code in the patient's past medical history template. So here we see an example where when we open up the past medical history, it says .mp : asthma and the diagnosis code, .mp : diabetes, and the ICD-9 code. Even if this patient's chart problem list has been updated to version to ICD-10, and even if these ICD-9 diagnosis codes in the code maintenance table have been updated to ICD-10, if the ICD-9 codes exist in past medical history, they are going to continue to push into note templates when you open up a note template that has that in there. So you've got to fix this. And there's a couple ways you can do it. The first way is you can just come into your templates and take out the past medical history, not necessarily the past medical history section, but take out the the ability for the software to push in the old past medical history. You can change it to the problem list if you wish. That's one way to fix it. The other way to fix it would be to go into your past medical history note for that patient, and using the HLI lookup tool, come in and update these codes in the past medical history template. The third way, and this might be the best way, is to come into the past medical history and just delete the .mp colon. So if you delete the dot, the MP, and the colon right out of there, it will stop pushing that into future notes. Okay, so that's the way to deal with the past medical history changes and challenges. Just one or two more slides here. Changes in the prenatal module. The biggest change here is just that the code column, it used to say ICD-9 code, now it says ICD code. And right now it's going to display the ICD-9 code. But just like in the lab order screen after the 1st of October, that will change and it will start displaying the ICD-10 code automatically if that code has been updated. If that code has not been updated, you will need to update it first. And again, we see the concept of the tooltip here. Hovering over it is going to show us the ICD-10 code, the SNOMED code, and then the ICD-9 code below it. And for those of you using the prenatal module, I think you're probably already aware, this is separate from the problem list. So even though you may have updated that problem on the problem list, you would need to update it on the prenatal list if it hasn't already been updated automatically. Okay, other areas in the EMR where we're going to see ICD-10 codes are in the area of WebView, standard and custom order reports, the patient inquiry report, which not too many people use that, except that it is a meaningful use core objective this year, so you need to be aware of that. And in the CCDA, or the Consolidated Clinical Document Architecture reports, those all display, or all can display, diagnosis codes. Some cases people don't have them display in WebView, but they can display there. And the code that displays it, again, it depends on your system date. And so if the system date is greater or equal than the 1st of October, it's going to display the 10 code. If it's before the 1st of October, it's going to display the ICD-9 code. Okay. Additional resources, the AVS Medical blog. strongly encourage everybody to sign up there. There's the address. It's right on our web page. We actually have two blogs. We have our, it's going to call it our regular blog, and then we have a Road to ICD-10 blog. I would encourage you to sign up for both of those. It is strictly educational material. There's no sales material presented there. It's all just educational stuff. The value of signing up for it is that as we publish things to that blog, you will automatically get an email notification that something new has been printed or posted. You can click it and it'll take you right to that. And then again, these slides and the video from today will be up on our blog page within the next day or two at the latest. You all get an email when that is up there. So with that, that's enough of me talking, and I'm running out of steam. If you would like to ask a question, on your GoToWebinar control panel is a little indication of a hand. You can click that. That'll be my cue to unmute your phone line. Or if you prefer, you can chat me a question, and I'll answer that question through the chat window. Or I'll answer it live. So I'm going to end the... and I've got the AVS team on here with me. They're really the experts. So I am going to, first off, bear with me a second. Let me unmute some of their phone lines. Okay, AVS team there, if you can unmute your phone lines. Okay. Nicole, maybe type it in the chat window. I can't, I apologize, I cannot hear you. I'm having a hard time hearing anybody, maybe on my end. Okay, hey, so I'm going to answer some of these questions in the chat window. And a great tip from one of our power users, Nira, thank you. Yes, you can, when you run those diagnosis lists, diagnosis code lists to determine what your most popular ones are, you can export them to Excel. And once you put them in Excel, you can then sort those and make it easier to find the ones that are most useful to you. Put them in order of how often you use them, and then make yourself a nice cheat sheet out of that. Thank you, Anira. That was a great one. Okay, great. Oh, fantastic. Thank you, Cindy. Appreciate that. I don't know why I can't hear folks, so I do apologize, ladies and gentlemen. I cannot hear you, but I believe you can hear me. So here's a question. Will all of our insurance companies automatically have ICD-10 turned on the 1st of October, or do you need to do it individually with each insurance company? So the answer is you have to do it individually. Well, you don't have to do it individually, but you do have to go in and tell it to start using the ICD-10 code by insurance companies in order for it to send it there. And I believe, Cindy, correct me if I'm wrong, but when you go into the ICD code carrier maintenance, there is a select all, and you can automatically send them to everybody. Mm-hmm. 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 Okay. Okay. Great. Thank you. Here's a great question, and I believe I know the answer to this. Cindy or Letha, correct me if I'm wrong, but the question here is, can one provider update all ICD-9 codes in the maintenance tab for the entire practice? In other words, if there's a practice with more than one provider and one person goes in and updates all those ICD-9 codes, does that apply to everybody? I believe the answer to that is yes. One and done. Okay, great. Thank you. The next question we've got through the chat window here is that once the templates have been updated and the notes to ICD-10, does it update retroactively? Yes. Well, if you use that diagnosis code maintenance table, if you go in there and you update one of the codes in there, it applies it retroactively to all of the codes in the software. Hmm. Yes, that's correct. That's correct. Well, the so a little bit of a finer point on that. If you update the quick text in the template, uh, and that quick text is used in more than one template, as it usually is, then it will be updated across all the templates. Did I answer that correctly, Cindy? Okay. Hmm. Yes. Yeah. Correct. That's correct. Okay. Okay. The next question is, can we go back and review how to edit those insurance companies? Um, the person asking that question is using Medisoft, and I don't have Medisoft on the machine I'm using to to do the to do this webinar presentation. So, Michelle, we can take that offline if you'd like, or you can on our Road ICD 10 blog. There's a webinar on exactly on how to do that with a video and step-by-step instructions. Either way, be happy to do it. The next question is, can you update diagnosis codes now? Um, the answer, and it's a two-part question. So the answer to the first part of that is yes, you can, and it does not hurt you to update them to ICD-10 now, because even though you update them, it's only going to send ICD-9 until you tell it not to. But the second part of your question, the author says, I tried to do it, and it says I'm unable to write the record to the database. So if you recall, and I know I threw a lot of information here, but when I was talking about that diagnosis code maintenance update, um, I talked about the fact that if you do it and you get an error, that means you're trying to update a code that that someone in your practice has edited that default ICD-9 diagnosis code that came with the software. So try it again. Go into the diagnosis code maintenance table, and I've got the slide back up here if you see it. And in the diagnosis code maintenance table, instead of doing it from the ICD-10 tab, you'll go over to the diagnosis code mapping tab and then click the advanced code lookup, excuse me, advanced code search, and then it should work. If you're still getting an error, that's a different problem, but the verbiage of the error that you describe is word for word what that particular error is. Okay, so if the problem list is updated with ICD-10, does the past medical history have to be updated also? No, it does not have to be updated. The only time the past medical history has to be updated is if it has that .mp code in front of it. And so I think everybody knows that .mp stands for major problem. Because if it has that .mp code in front of it, so let's say the past medical history was preeclampsia, and you have .mp colon preeclampsia, and then whatever the 9 code is for that, it's going to push that um, it's going to push that code into every note and onto every problem list, even though you've already updated the preeclampsia ICD-9 code in the problem list or in the diagnosis code table. You've got to fix the past medical history if it's doing that. Okay, so Emma, that was your question too. Good. Two birds with one stone. Okay, how do you get the ranking report? That's being asked from a practice partner user. Um, that is on the practice partner medical billing side. Now, for you, because you're using an outsourced billing company, they would probably be the ones to give you that report. I would suggest starting there because I don't think you actually have the medical billing component to your EMR. Um, the next question is in Lytec PM, where do you go to set the date for ICD-10? I do have Lytec installed on this machine, so I think I'm going to try to open it up and show you. But in Lytec, and it's true of Medisoft as well. And by the way, this question does not apply to Practice Partner users because it's automatic in Practice Partner. But we've got some other Practice Partner questions coming, so don't hang up yet. But in Lytec and Medisoft, it's in the ICD-10 Tools section. So here it is in Lytec, Tools, ICD-10 Tools, Set Insurance Code Set. It's right here. Okay. So, and my little demo here, let's see if I can make it a little bit bigger. So mine, it has not been updated. So you can see here on the right, it says ICD-10 effective date. That has not yet been set up. So what I would do is come down to the bottom left and hit select all. Cindy just showed me how to do this yesterday. So Cindy, chime in if I'm not doing it right. I hit select all and then I hit update selected. Now, by the way, Maddie, if you didn't want to update, say, I don't know what Sup Health is, but if I didn't want to update that one, I could just uncheck it and then hit updates. Okay. Yep. Oh, yeah. Good point. Yeah, good. You know what, Cindy, in Medisoft you do, but in Lytec you don't. So Cindy's pointing out something here. The effective date right here, it's a glitch in Medisoft. It's been around for years. You can't select it from the calendar. In Lytec you can. And then you would hit the update selected. Oops. Select all my insurance companies, uncheck Sub Health, and then click update. And now notice there it is. So the effective date. So that means you can still send ICD-10 codes now from the EEF over to the practice management software, but it's going to ignore the ICD-10 code until the 1st of October. Okay, lots of questions, so I'm just going to keep going here, and please email us if we haven't answered your questions to your satisfaction. The next question has to do with the web-based EMR from McKesson called Practice Choice. Yes, we will be doing one for that here in the next week or two. We're waiting. They're making a big change in this release that's coming out, I think, this weekend, so that's why I haven't done it yet. Okay. Okay, so the next question's a good one, and I got frustrated with this one, so I deleted it out of my slideshow. But the question here is, if you're using the EEF or the electronic encounter form and pushing codes to your practice management software with updated diagnosis codes, do you still have to add those codes to the practice management program similar to the way we presented it in an earlier webinar? And the answer is you do. So I took this. Okay, so I got frustrated with it. So you answer it. I'm going to bring up that slide. It's an image that I took, but go ahead and answer it. I'll stop talking. Hard to see. Mm-hmm. Great, Cindy. Quite a few more questions, so I'm going to keep moving here. So if you're not ordering labs through Practice Partner, what's the best way to approach the ICD-10 issue? Well, not ordering labs doesn't really affect the ICD-10 issue. I think though that if you want to meet meaningful use again this year, if you're in stage 2 and you are, that a certain percentage, I don't have it in front of me, I think it's 30. If Katie's on the line, she knows better than I, but I believe it's 30% of all of your labs have to be ordered through the order module. And that doesn't mean they have to go electronically. You don't actually have to transmit them to the lab, but you do have to create an order in the system to get meaningful use credit. 60. Well, it's a okay. Okay, great. That's okay. Thanks, Kate. Okay, so if you have an ICD-9 code attached to a diagnosis code, can we attach an ICD-10 code to it? I'm not sure I understand that question. I apologize. I don't understand that one. Maybe shoot me an email with that one. I apologize. Or just re-chat it in there a little differently. I don't quite understand that. If you have, but if you have an ICD-9 code attached to a diagnosis, I'm guessing maybe a custom diagnosis code. Yes, you can attach an ICD-10 code to it right through that code maintenance window. You would just pull up your custom code in the code maintenance window, use the HLI lookup tool, and that will update it there. So the next question says if you were updating the effective date on the ICD-10 in Lytec and you entered 10/1/15, is that okay? No, that's perfectly fine. That's exactly correct. You're great there. Yeah, so the next one's a good one. Uh, how and when do we change the paper patient encounter form to reflect the ICD-10 codes? So that's for all users, Medisoft, Lytec, and Practice Partner. That's going to be a big one. Um, you should be working on that now. You should start with that diagnosis code ranking report. So in your case, you're going to want to get that from your billing company. For those of you that are doing billing in-house, you're going to want to run those reports and um, determine what are your most commonly used ICD-9 codes, do the mapping to the ICD-10, and then start laying out what those encounter forms look like. Um, it's probably outside the scope of today, but a one-page encounter form is very likely going to be multiple pages in ICD-10. Um, and that multiple page encounter form or super bill is not something I think most people want to use. And it's extraordinarily difficult to create it in the software. So what we do is we create it in Excel, and then you print out a bunch of those, like print out maybe 100 of them, and you leave room at the top, and then you put those pre-printed forms in your printer and print the patient's information across the top of them. It sounds a little kludgy, but it works great, and we can cover that in a future webinar or in a one-off session. While we're on the topic of that, in Lytec and in Medisoft, I apologize to you because you're a practice partner, but in Lytec and Medisoft, you do have the ability to use an iPad or a phone, an iPhone, or an Android to have an electronic encounter form. So instead of a paper encounter form, the providers can use a tablet and have an electronic super bill on that tablet, and they can just tap, 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 and it sends it right over into the practice management software. It gives you another device you've got to carry, but if you're not using the EEF, that would be a solution there for that. So next question, can you scan written lab order and will it still apply to meaningful use? No, you'd have to create the lab order in the software in order for it to count. Because if you don't create the order in the software, that's how it's tracked on your performance metrics report. That I think, at least for the moment, is the end of those questions. Is the end of the questions. Up. No. So the next question is, if you're for lab orders, does it need to be printed? Katie, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think it does not need to be printed. For meaningful use, in order to get. Okay. hmm Right. Right. Yep. So let's say you have a results interface today, but you do not have an orders interface. We do have orders interfaces to some labs, but not all. So if you're getting labs from one of the ones that we don't, and they're coming in electronically, but you're today handwriting them, what you want to do for at least 30% of them is go into the orders module and put the order in the orders module. Don't have to print it, you just have to create that order. The next question is, how do you find out if you have met meaningful use for labs? Well, you would run your performance metrics report. Nicole, I'm not 100% sure I know what practice you're from, but I think you are in, I believe I know, and I believe you are in stage 2 this year of yes. Oh, okay. Yeah, you are in stage 2 of meaningful use this year, which means that, yeah, lab orders are important to you. So when you run your performance metrics report, when it comes up, there is right on there's one main screen. There's a choice that says stage 1 or stage 2. It's going to default to stage 1, so you hit the drop down to stage 2, then do select all, and then run your meaningful use report. And that'll tell you what percentage you have. So didn't want to, I mean, happy to answer questions on meaningful use, and don't want to go too far down there because I don't want to, for those folks who are here who don't care about it today, I don't want to get too far off on that tangent. But keep an eye out on our blog post. Any day now, we're waiting for word from CMS. They should be publishing their final rule change literally any day. They proposed a rule change in April, and the proposed rule change made some major changes to meaningful use this year. The biggest change they proposed was dialing it back to another 90-day period as opposed to a 12-month period. And they've also proposed taking out the requirement that patients have to use the web portal. So we expect any day to get that final issuance from CMS on what the rule changes are. And once we do, we'll post that on our blog. Happy to hang around here for some more questions. Okay, well, I see folks are starting to drop out of the webinar, and I'm not getting any more questions. So that kind of tells me that everybody's questions have been answered. My email is lloyd@avsmedical.com. That's LLOYD@avsmedical.com. If I don't know the answer, I'll get it to the right person on our team that does. Thank you all once again for your time and attention this afternoon. We hope you found it useful, and look for a post here any day now. Thanks again, everybody.